My name is Tim Ruswick, and today on the Devology Livecast, we're with Rick Davidson and Todd D'arcy from Stutter Fox Studios, who's a developer of Falling Frontier, a super awesome sci-fi game that we're going to talk about, and we're gonna talk about a lot of things. Rick's face is oversized on the stream. I'm so done. I'm so done with Skype.
It.
Yes, we're gonna make it
So,
happen.
Todd, my first question for you is, what live streaming software would you recommend we use instead of using this nonsense we've cobbled together?
That is not my forte. It's not in my wheelhouse. I'm sorry. So you guys are on your own.
All right. Well, while Tim's trying to fix our technology, I don't know. I quite like it, Tim. I like the fact that I'm broken there. That matches the fact that I can't green screen out my green screen. So, Todd, we'll dive straight into talking about you and what you're up to. And our audience is really interested in indie game developers. They're interested in the journey that you're going through. So, can you start by telling us about the tool set that you're using? Are you a Unity guy? Have you built your own engine? And if you have built your own engine, can you please tell everyone else not to build their own engine and to stop asking us to teach them how to build their own engine? What tools are you using and what's your workflow?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I would not advocate for building your own engine. If you want to make a game at scale, then that's just going to add massive overheads. But I am a Unity developer. So that is my core framework. Outside of that, I use things like Fmod to basically do my sound authoring. It's a great third-party tool that is very affordable for indie developers. I make use of the Unity Asset Store where possible. Although, having said that, everything I use from there. So it's a mixture of, so my assets are a mixture of handcrafted, licensed, and a kit bash of both.
Just to interrupt you there, Can you tell us a little bit about kit bashing and your strategy for that and what it means for people who don't know about it? And also, Can you tell us why my audio is not synced up with my lips? Actually, we'll get to that later on.
Well, from what I'm seeing, it is, but perhaps not on the...
maybe it's just people complaining just to mess with us in chat. But kit bashing, how do you go about with kit bashing? What is it and what are you doing?
So kit bashing at its core is basically a bunch of tiny components that can form something larger. So whether that's a building, set props, starships, whatever it is, you can basically join bits together that have a common theme, or if they don't have a common theme, that can actually work well because that can kind of give you a bit more of that stylized look that you could be going for. So in my case, it might be, well, I use licensed like assets, and then I might chop them up, or I might add my own, because I've got a background in 3D animation as well. That's what I studied. So that's a great tool to have to be able to do that. So that's what kit bashing is at a very high level. But it can frequently be, its origin is kind of not in a performant manner where it's just you don't care about poly counts and things like that. It's about just creating something that you just slam together. So you do need to be careful the sort of things that you kit bash together, because you could be creating a bit of overhead with your draw calls and things like that. So just something to be aware of.
Got it.
This is a question just from my perspective. How do you keep track of licensing for all that stuff? Do you just buy like general, like super licensing packs and stuff?
Well, yeah. So the Unity Asset Store, their licenses are pretty much fine as far as things go. There's a couple of exceptions where they explicitly state the type of license that you can't make. Well, you can't redistribute it, or you can't use it in a commercial project. But 99.9% or 99.99999% of assets on the Unity asset store can be modified. It's in their standard terms of service. You can do what you want with it, just as long as you don't resell it as that asset kind of thing. Yeah. Plus, you also can't take a bunch of assets, chop them up, and then repackage them and then resell them as a kit bash thing. You can't do that. But if you want to do that for your game and then sell it as a part of a product, that's perfectly fine.
Cool.
And can you transition now and tell us a little bit about the game you're working on,
Sure.
how long you've been working on it for,
Yep.
and where can we all have a look at it now? I think Tim has the technology to bring this up on his screen.
Sure.
It's going to break everything, though. Like my voice will be swapped with your voice, and
No, that's fine. Well, if you are going to check out a specific video, I would recommend checking out the recent Soul trailer. That's the most recent sort of state of the game. But I'm working on a game called Falling Frontier. It's a space sci-fi RTS game. It's what I'd call an RTS 4X hybrid, or RTX Grand Strategy hybrid. It's very much an RTS at its core, but it brings in elements of that grander strategy game that RTS games aren't necessarily known for. It's a game about risk and reward, choice and consequence. It's what I would call a grounded sci-fi. Some people call it a hard sci-fi, but I don't like that term because that's a very subjective term. People have their own ideas of what hard sci-fi is. Are there aliens? Are there no aliens? Is the jump tech believable? Is it not? Does it use Newtonian physics or not? So that's very subjective. So I like to say it's a grounded sci-fi. And what that means for me is that there's a lot of elements in the game that people can automatically identify with. So one of the systems is it's got a celestial line of sight system, and line of sight is something that we're all very familiar with, that you can't see stuff behind other stuff. So this takes that to a whole celestial level. So you can hide bases on the darks, while the dark side from a sensor perspective, so the dark side of a planet, you can hide things in like asteroid belts and things like that. There's also a physicalized resource structure to it. So what that means is that you just don't have a global global resource pool, because most RTS games you collect wood or whatever it is, and it just goes to the top, this resource bar that you can access anywhere. In Falling Frontier, everything is physicalized. So if you've got a shipyard towards the front line, you've got to actually send resources there. And so you've got to have a trade route which can be intercepted. So planets and moons can be blockaded, and it creates a very different reliance on logistics and being able to supply your war machine. So that's one of the core pillars of the game.
Are we able to be looking at the Steam page while Todd's talking about it?
I could pull it up.
That'd give some context. Although you're like, oh, I haven't set up all the views for that, Rick. Stop it.
This game looks amazing, though. I can tell you that.
We could hide ourselves and just show the game.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's got a deep crew management system where people are actual people in the world attached to ships, and if they're killed, well, then you lose your ship, and crew are tied to your actual economy. So crew pay taxes, but if they get killed, well, then that impacts how much taxation you get, which then possibly determines whether or not you might actually want to commit to a combat action. So combat is also something that's very visceral. The projectiles are physicalized. Again, that's the buzzword, but it's not a predictive style of combat where if you've got 3 of these, they will take out 1 of these. It doesn't work that way because shots can miss. They can actually ricochet, which is based upon the actual engagement range and things like that. And yeah, so these ships are these big hulking physical objects that can just get torn apart and just. One of the core pillars is I wanted everything to look good. I wanted it to look as though it wasn't made by one guy, which it is. I'm a solo developer.
You're a solo developer, really?
Solo
I do
developer.
not get that vibe from this game. Like, this looks amazing.
Good. Thank you.
I think what you were saying before about using asset packs, it's really clear. If you, and this is smart, we preach this all the time. Don't take 3 years making amazing spaceships yourself. Find some other way to get them, but then use them in a clever way, join them together, modify them, etc. So that's really coming through in your game, I think.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think the thing is to say about asset packs is, and you don't have to do this, but I'm an advocate for making them your own in some way.
Yeah.
Putting your spin on it, putting your take on it. If you make them your own, then you've left your mark on them. And who knows, people might start to see those assets in other games, but think that they actually came from your game, which ultimately it doesn't matter. And the thing that's frequently not spoken about is that the AAA space use assets as well. There is no way they can produce everything from scratch.
Yeah.
Like scene dressing. I'm not talking about hero assets. I'm talking about boxes and barrels and things like that.
Yeah.
Like, they will purchase them because that's far more cost effective. And I even saw some assets. Or I won't name names of the games, but in some recent sci-fi games, strategy games, where a bunch of the ship assets in a trailer was from the Unity asset store. It's just like they do it. Don't be afraid of doing it. Some people will slam you for it, but people will always slam you for something in the game development space.
Yeah.
Because it's a very subjective medium.
And
it's
sure.
No.
I was going to say, anyone who's watching now should go jump over to the Steam page for Falling Frontier, have a look at it, and make sure you wish list it, and so that we're supporting Todd and his journey. It looks like I see a thingy here, released Q2 2022.
That's the current target.
So coming soon. Nice.
That's the target, but I also, I'm in a fortunate position that I'm not bound by strict deadlines. I don't like deadlines. I always wanted to make a game where deadlines weren't a thing, purely because deadlines force you to release something. It can force you to actually release something before it's actually ready, and you only get one chance to actually launch your first game, right? So I prefer targets because targets can be moved, but it's also good to set both private targets and public targets because it gives you something to strive towards. Even if you don't get there, it gives you something to strive towards. It helps keep you accountable, especially with a public project for like an indie dev. It gives people something to look forward to as well. So yeah, Q2 is the current target I'm aiming to meet, but if I feel as though I need to push it back a little bit further, then yeah, there's no issues with that.
Nice. And can you tell us a little bit about your journey into game development? Did you go off to game development school? Have you been chipping away at this for many years? Did you take a course or two? How long have you been solo indie? How are you paying the bills? All that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I, out of high school, in like the very early 2000s, I'm an older gentleman now.
It's all relative, Todd.
It is. That's why I shave, because the grey shows through.
Gotcha.
I studied 3D animation for games, film, and television, almost straight out of high school. at university. And at the time that I went in, there were lots of government grants in Australia that were basically funding the games industry, but that sort of dried up once some big games kind of came out, which then meant that the studios dried up, or their capacity and their employment opportunities dried up. So unless I wanted to move overseas, which I wasn't keen on at the time, then had to go into something else. So I actually didn't get into game development then. I went into first retail, as many young people coming out of university do, or hospitality, and eventually found my way into IT. So I worked for a financial company for almost 10 years. I was a BA there, so a business analyst, just writing design documents and communicating with clients and developers, so that middleman kind of job. But it was a good skill to have because it helps you understand specifications and scope creep and all those sort of things. And I eventually, I eventually left that job and just decided to, throughout that time, I had been learning game development, been learning Unity. Even throughout that time, I even enrolled in a GameDev.tv course.
Oh, sorry to hear that, Todd.
well,
hopefully,
oh
God, I don't want to know which instructor you were exposed to in that course or instructors.
It was you. So
and yet here you are.
Look, and I admit I didn't do the whole course. I
don't think I've met anyone who's finished the whole course, Todd, so don't worry about it. Look, although in our chat, I reckon there's some people in our chat who've finished at least one of our courses the whole way through. That's been me yabbering nonsense. So,
look, yeah. Just speaking about the course, I could tell the course was good. It was great.
Todd, you don't need to.
No.
You don't need to protect me here. It's all good.
I know, but I want to try to show that there are different ways to learn, and the GameDev.tv courses are a fantastic way to learn. If that's the way your brain works and having a structured format to learning, fantastic. The content was great. The integration between coding and the engine, or at least from the Unity course, fantastic. So it's a great platform for learning, and I use the course to basically validate my self learning, because I'm actually a really good self learner. I like to set myself a hard challenge and find my way to it and fail along the way, which is a great way to learn too, just constantly failing, because then you figure out what not to do. So yeah, I did a bit of a GameDev.tv course, and that basically validated that I thought I at least had the core skills to get started. So I started prototyping, all while I was working as a BA, over maybe 6 or 7 years. I forget the exact time frames, but a long prototyping phase, because big games are really hard to make. They get really complicated very fast, and then you get to a point where I'm at, that even making a small change is very time consuming. Like Falling Frontier is over 800,000 lines of code, which comparing to a AAA game is still small, but for an indie project, that's quite huge. For a solo project, that's quite huge. So I went through a prototyping phase to figure out how would I do this, and go, okay, I think I know how I want to do my movement system, how I want to do my camera system, my research systems, all of these things, which I didn't always end up sticking to, but I at least had a plan to then, when I got to the production state, I could then execute that plan, and then perhaps find out, well, it wasn't that great, or it was great, because you don't know what you don't know. And that's one of the downsides of being a solo developer, is that is that you don't have people to bounce ideas off of. You don't have senior people around you to say, this is perhaps a better way to do it.
Yeah.
And so you have to be prepared to fail a lot and to be able to push through that failure, or to fail fast. So find the fastest way to do the wrong thing. So I ended up leaving that IT job and just went full time on Falling Frontier. Have been working on it for over 3 years now. I started in October 2018. And most of that time was doing 90 plus hours a week.
Wow. Are you okay?
Well, I mean, the voices say I'm fine. So I think so. But that's the reality of some, it's not easy to do big games. And they say you should never make an RTS or a strategy game as your first game. And I understand now why they say that, because they're big games. Even a simple RTS is a big game. But if I wasn't making an RTS, I wouldn't be making games. So if that's the game you want to make, then go out and do it. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. I had people for a decade telling me that I wouldn't be able to make a game. I don't have the skills, like you aren't a programmer. You don't know how to do that. Well, learn the skills. And I'm very blessed that Falling Frontier is currently ranked 33rd on the most wishlisted games on Steam at the moment. It's beating Homeworld 3, which is...
You hit the Steam audience head on. I was going to say, like, sci-fi, dark, like, hard sci-fi, or, grounded sci-fi, like you were saying. Like, that's older, more mature audience. It's dead on for the Steam audience.
Yeah, and so it's doing well. I won't share the metrics of how many wish lists it's got, but it's doing well. It's beating some AAA games with much larger marketing scopes and budgets, and quality assets that aren't bought from an asset store. But it just goes to show people don't care about that stuff. They care about all of the parts joined together, about the package.
Is every asset, sorry to interrupt you, is every asset in the game from an asset pack?
No.
So you've made some stuff personally?
Yeah, and I've retextured stuff as well and things like that. Okay. And like lots of the UI I build from scratch as well, which is an interesting beast doing UI. It's just incredibly complicated for a strategy game, especially for a grand strategy game or a 4X game. There's so many UI elements. I think I have about 100,000 lines of code just for UI at the moment. It's
making that
huge.
sci-fi UI that like flutters and makes those beats.
It's
so satisfying though.
It is. I mean, the end result is good, but it takes time to, like, I'm not a UX designer, not at all. And my first UI attempts, I was proud of them, but looking back, I just shudder. But it's that iterative process with anything that you do, which is really, really important.
Todd, how are you going about getting feedback from players? Do you have a review group? Do you have a closed beta that you're doing? Is it just you and your friend being like, oh, this would be cool? What's your process for improving it? You're mentioning iterative. What's been the iterative game player feedback approach?
Sure. So it started as friends, because like that's where it always starts, friends and family. Giving both feedback from you send them a video, or perhaps they get to play it. But that has expanded into a closed testing group, which I do add people to that group via my Discord server. There's an application process when there's a testing phase going on, and there will be one in the near future. But it's But because I come from an IT development background, I'm an advocate for it's not a play test. It's a bug finding test. So there are requirements to get people, to basically use something like GitHub to be able to lodge tickets and things like that. And there's a training onboarding process that we go through to try and do that to help people learn, because if they want to get into game dev, well, this is a part of game dev, being able to raise tickets and understand the whole sort of ticketing process. So everything I do in the server, I try and have it as a medium that if people want to learn to do this, well, then hopefully those interactions and those conversations, and even from a testing perspective, understanding how a game works as opposed to how you want it to work. And that's the key thing with a tester, because when someone comes to actually test the game, the key thing I've found is that lots of people have an idea of how they want it to work, not how it's supposed to work.
Yep.
And so training people in how it should work, as opposed, because it's not a bug if it's just not behaving the way you want it to. So being able to identify that, so that's the iterative process, that feedback loop of players finding bugs and also offering suggestions, because the thing is, when you're a solo developer or a small team, you're very close to a project and your way of doing it might not be the best way. So you need to be open to taking criticism, constructive criticism, because it's going to come whether you want it or not. Sometimes it's not very constructive and sometimes it's just harsh, but that's usually not testers, because they want to support you. That's more the external. But yeah, so that feedback loop of being able to accept criticism is really key. If you can't do that, then that's a skill that you might need to learn to get good at. And that was honestly something I had to learn too. At first, I took stuff to heart, because how can't you when you've worked on something for years in isolation?
90 hours a week.
Yeah, it's so close to you. How can you not take some kind of any comment is a personal jab at you? But it's not. It's this thing that you love, but other people love it too. And that's the key thing to understand, that these suggestions come from people wanting it to succeed.
So we've got some questions in the chat at the moment. Sure. A couple of main buckets. One main bucket is, so it sounds like you've been going at this for a few years.
Yes.
How do you support yourself? Did you save up the nest egg? Do you have a partner who works? The government grants you're talking about before, Patreon. What's been it? Sure. Rather than saying specifically what have you done, what would be the strategy that you would recommend for folks watching in terms of, okay, this is possibly going to take 3 years of dedicated time. What's the strategy that that may have worked for you or you might recommend?
Sure. Well, I mean, I can talk about broader strategies and sort of then narrow in on what I did. Because how people want to do it, there's no one right way to do it and there's no best way to do it. It's what's best for you and your circumstances. And that will ultimately potentially have knock-on effects as to how things go. So the obvious ones, there's crowdsourcing. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I didn't do crowdsourcing, didn't do Kickstarter, didn't do Patreon. I had the philosophy that I'm an unknown developer. And for me personally, I'm not saying that people don't have the right to ask for this, but me personally, I felt as though I didn't have the right to ask people for money for an idea I had. I personally didn't feel comfortable with that. So I'm 100% self-funded. There's an element of saving, for many years, being able to buffer this. So Falling Frontier's been an idea or something I've been working towards for over a decade, easily, close to 2 decades. I mean, I started designing some of the systems when I was back in high school in the late 90s, pen and paper, before I had the skills. I was thinking about it. I was dreaming about it. I was always living this world in one way or another. So it's not an overnight success. It can't be, right? I mean, like, stuff that can happen. Like, you can just get very lucky and things just line up and you've got this great idea and people want it and then they'll just fund you. But it usually doesn't work that way. There's usually planned preparation, the realization that it might take a decade to get to your goal, and that's also character building too. So that's really key. So in order to also mitigate financial issues, I am married, so my wife works.
Sounds so romantic the way you put
time.
that. You know, well,
Well,
you know, from a financial standpoint, I went and found someone and got married. Just, hey, would you mind supporting me while I make my game? And they were like,
we were married
that's
before
so romantic, Todd.
We were married before it, so it's all good. And look, that was a key conversation that we had. And look, my wife's not a gamer. She doesn't understand why I love it.
Yep.
But she trusted that I knew what I was talking about, which is fantastic. And it's turned out that it's worked out well. But you know, like, that's a serious conversation that people might have to have with their partner or perhaps parents or whoever it is. You know, and there is a lot of stigma with gaming, right? Still, at times. I mean, it's getting better, but you can always have that sort of fiscal conversation. Well, the games industry, like 3 or 4 years ago, was making 3 times both film and music combined every year. So fiscally, it is the largest entertainment industry in the entire world. You know, so it's, yeah. So there are ways to have those conversations with people who aren't gamers that don't necessarily understand. And look, that wasn't the pitch I did to my wife. It's just that, you know, we had been together for a very long time now. You know, just most of my adult life, and so she trusts me. So there's that trust element too. And so look, those are some of the avenues that you can go down. There's also the publishing route. So I actually have a publisher as well. So
interesting. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Sure. So over the period of developing Falling Frontier, I was approached by about 30 publishers. Turned them all down, and except for one and they were a new indie publisher. They're called Hooded Horse. They're based in Dallas, Texas.
Sorry, how did they all learn about you? Was this from you?
Just word of mouth, basically.
Word of mouth. Just you had your Steam page up, or you had videos out there, or you went to conferences. What was the?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So publishers will be looking at things like Steam pages and getting onto upcoming lists are really good. But how do you do that? There are 2 ways to market your game. The first way is organically. Let it speak for itself. Over time, things will slowly grow. You'll see a curve of your followers on Steam. Steam DB is a great resource for basically seeing these curves. Yep. You'll if you look at Falling Frontier on Steam DB, you'll see for a couple of years, I think I gained maybe a couple of hundred followers, or perhaps 1,000 over 2 years, right? Or just over 2 years, perhaps like 2 years, couple of months. And then there's a spike. And that spike was when GameStar, the German publication, covered the game. And they actually ended up doing a 6-page article on Falling Frontier in a printed magazine, nice. Which is really cool. It's in German. I don't understand it, but I've got the translated version, so that's great. And so then you see a spike because there's that feedback loop, and then people go to wishlist a game and they follow you, and there's rough approximations of you can multiply the like number of followers by a certain metric to work out the general number of wish lists a game has. And there's some truth to it, but depending upon the game, it might be higher than that, it might be lower, but there's some general rules that you can follow around that.
Yeah.
And so there was a spike there, and then a YouTuber named Party Elite saw the game, and then it spiked there.
So you weren't out knocking on anyone's door. You were just doing your thing and saying, "Here's some stuff," and they were finding you.
Just to jump in. I tell a lie. I should go right back to the very beginning. I first reached out to a bunch of YouTubers back in late 2019. The first, there were a bunch, but one of them was interested in the game, and that was Upper Echelon Gamers. He was interested in basically having, the invitation was, and this was the honest invitation. So late 2019. It was, I'm not expecting you to do any video, but you are very good at analyzing games. I would love it if you could give me feedback.
Okay.
That's how I approached it, because that was more important than any content creator doing a video. And if they wanted to do one, then great. So I caught up with Chris from UEG over the space of close to a year. We had monthly meetings, so he could see the game growing, developing, feedback going into the game, and then also seeing how some of his feedback perhaps wasn't as good as he thought it was, and so we could have lots of technical discussions. And then he eventually did a video, and a part of his indie spotlights. And then a whole bunch of people from that community joined my Discord. And then I've got a fairly large German community in my Discord server. One of them reached out to GameStar, and that's the organic way that it never started as me trying to pitch it. It was always, I would love your feedback. And that may or may not work. I mean, I was very blessed that it worked for me, but I always try to have this very transparent approach. And then from GameStar, PC Gamer did an article, because all of the publications tend to follow each other. And then, the GameStar, Party Elite, other YouTubers, Republic of Play, most recently, Obsidian Ant's been following the game. IGN follows the game. PC Games N follows the game. So shortly after the Party Elite part is when the publisher that I signed with first reached out to me. But even before Upper Echelon Gamers did a video, publishers were contacting me. Some I would call AA publishers, some smaller publishers. So I reviewed a lot of contracts, went through that process, learned how lots of publishers want to publish games. And I wasn't pleased with that. So by the point that Hooded Horse came onto the scene, now I will happily say this number, but I was at about 70,000 wish lists without a publisher. Lots of AA publishers will get their games to maybe 30 or 40,000 wish lists, so I already knew that I was doing better than what they would try to achieve for me. So Tim from Hooded Horse basically said to me, look, he was the only publisher that said this, and he said, you don't need a publisher to be successful. But let me try to win your business to show how we can multiply that success by X amount. And so reverse psychology, he got his foot in the door, worked out well. But at the end of the day, a publishing agreement, you have to be okay with the terms, because there are lots of terms in most publishing agreements that are actually anti-developer. And that's something to be really careful of. So I mean, like, lots of publishers are able to dictate release schedules. Lots of publishers just might not even announce that they're publishing you, because they want to see how your game goes organically. And then if it doesn't perform well, then they silently drop you as if they never published you.
Yeah.
That can happen. It has happened a lot. But there are also good publishers out there like Hooded Horse that don't do that. Like, they don't set stuff like, you know, I've got to release by a certain time frame. They don't do that. I can just delay the game as much as I want. You know, it's a relationship. It's a conversation. They've even got something in their charter about that publishing a game doesn't have to be for like profits. It can be because it actually needs to exist as a game. So they look at the art first, and that's the primary thing. And then they see, well, how profitable is this going to be for us? Plus, also, most publishers will go down the path of at least 50-50 start, which is kind of a hard pill to swallow when you've worked on something for many years and you've done that.
If you have that much traction by yourself, like, seems unfair.
And the thing is, publishers, they are the ones that can bear the risk because they've got multiple games. So if one game underperforms, game B or C will outperform and it evens out. But for most developers, they can't afford to, like, this is their game. If it doesn't work well, they're done. A good publisher doesn't start, well, I shouldn't say a good publisher doesn't start at 50-50, because it depends upon how much funding you might need. Like, you know, like if you need like $1 million because you've got a large team, well, they might ask for 50-50 or even more, or even way more, but that gives you security. But the rest of the terms, that's what's important.
Yeah.
But Hooded Horse, you usually start about the 30-70 mark kind of thing. I mean, Tim has openly said that on like interviews and stuff like that. So I'm happy to share it.
That's 30% publisher, 70% developer, yeah?
Correct, yeah. Yeah. And, you know, that's without the sort of Hollywood accounting of they charge for everything, like every second that they spend. It's like, well, no, like that. So the funds that they spend is on marketing. It is external to their costs that they absorb, which most publishers don't absorb their costs like that. Like, they charge you, they bill you for everything.
As soon as that's a scary situation. If they're saying we'll do a split of the revenue, but that's after all of our costs are taken into consideration, then you, unless there's a cap on that, or unless it's very specifically, you know, it will be $10,000 per month and no more, or whatever the number might be. Yeah, that's a scary situation to be in. Someone in the chat was just asking what to look out for when looking at these publisher deals and what to be wary of. And I think anything that's open-ended, where you don't know how much that's going to be or what that, you know, we'll do some marketing for you. How much marketing? Well, we'll do some marketing. That's
exactly.
You know, how much? I need a guarantee.
How much, and do you have the right to actually audit them as well? That's important. Like, even if it's once a year, like, actually, I mean, that's at your own cost, right? Of course, but the actual ability to say, I want to see your books. Where have you spent the money? That's important, because that's transparency. It's got to work both ways, right? So, and also a key thing with publishing agreements is, firstly, lots of publishers will only send, well, firstly, they usually work on a recoup model. So basically the publisher gets everything that they spent before you see a single cent.
Right.
And most publishers also will send you royalties maybe every quarter. So if you think about it, like say it takes 6 months, like if your game does well and it takes 6 months to basically recoup or all of their costs, plus they only send you profits quarterly, you might not see a single cent for 10 months after release.
Yeah. So
which is something people don't think about.
If your game's on Steam, or as it is on Steam, do you have an arrangement with your publisher where the funds go to the publisher and they distribute, or an arrangement where funds go to you and you distribute, or what's the how you were saying before about maybe the publisher, well, they'll give you the money quarterly. What's the actual logistics of how the money gets divvied up for you guys?
Yeah, so the typical arrangement for any publisher, and this is hooded horse as well, because from an accounting perspective and from a taxation perspective, it actually is probably better that the publisher has the actual relationship with Steam.
Yep.
So Steam takes their cut, they send the profits to the publisher, and then the publisher does the accounting, and then they send it on to the studios. Yep. Now, depending upon your location, that can actually work incredibly well because of different taxations that you might have to pay, because you might have because if you are dealing with Steam as an entity, then you still have to, pay taxes to like the IRS and stuff like that.
Yep.
Whereas if the publisher's doing it, they are the ones that have the relationship with the IRS, and you have the relationship with the publisher.
Yep.
Things like that. So that can actually work better for you. But I mean, that's usually the arrangement. What a studio or a developer has to do is they've got to go through a process that they sign over the Steam app, so the Steam app page, the app to the publisher. Now, you aren't giving ownership of your game to the publisher unless it's in your contract that you are, but you would never do that. But you are signing over ownership of the Steam page to the publishers, so they can manage it. Now, not all publishers will do this, but my publisher gives me co-management rights, so I've got access to all of the Steam data and everything as well. Some publishers lock that down, some won't. Just depends.
So there's a question in chat, and I was wondering this as well. Like, why bother with a publisher at 70K wish list? Like, what did you want out of it?
I wanted over 300,000 wish lists. I wanted.
So you wanted that
just
acceleration.
Amplify your.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, look, 70,000 wish list is a great place to be, but the higher. So there's conversion rates, right? So, with a publisher, sorry, not with a publisher. So just with any wish list, there's going to be conversion rates, and so this is actually a really, really good question. Just because you've got 70,000 wish lists doesn't mean you're going to get 70,000 sales. So the average conversion rate is about 10%. It can be less. It can be much higher. It can be everything. It depends on the game. Like a AAA game, chances are it's almost everything. But for indie games, it's usually around the 10% mark. So is that sustainable after your taxation commitments, and also the time that it's taken you to actually develop this thing? Now, look, ultimately, I would have been, back when I started, I would have been happy with like 12,000 sales. That would have been success to me. But Falling Frontier has grown that potentially over the game's life, over 1 million copies is potentially feasible. And so your goals can change as you go down that path. Now, I guess the important thing is that you have to be careful, because you don't want to be led by greed. Like, you want to be able to make something better, and also give players more. So what that looked like to me was that going with a publisher, it basically gave me creative, and if I needed financial freedom, I haven't. I'm still basically self-funded from a dev perspective. From a marketing perspective, the publisher takes care of that. But from a developer perspective, if I need funding, I just have to put up my hand and say, hey, can I have funding? And that's a wonderful place to be in, to just be able to know you can create everything that you want to create, right?
What gave you the
so,
confidence? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sure.
What
No,
what gave you the confidence that they were going to be able to like double or triple your wish list? Like what in a publisher made you think, okay, I've got a game with traction, they can take me to the next level?
Because, well, so something I did, which I openly was, with our first video call, I purposely didn't have my camera on, but he did, so I could read his facial expressions. I could read everything. I could throw out difficult questions. And you know, like, basically, I could tell he was genuine with what he was saying. Now, it's always possible that you could get that wrong. But I like to think
him, though. Like, that was the main thing.
Well, there's an element of trust, yeah, of course, but there was also stuff in the contract, because Falling Frontier was doing so well, which basically secured, well, that basically meant, in order for them to succeed publishing Falling Frontier, they would have to make it succeed. So there was that, which was like, well, if they don't do a great job, well, then it means nothing to me. Like, I don't owe them anything. So that was something on the contract as well, that because there was no recoup, because they don't work with a recoup. Now, if a developer wants to do a recoup, they might do a partial recoup where you know, like, you give them a higher percentage to start with, so maybe 35 or 40%, until, like, for the first couple of years or the first year, and then after that it might drop down to 20 or 25%. But that's because greater risk is on them. So therefore, if you want to go down that path, you can. But if you just want to do a split, well, you can do that too. And because there's no recoup, well, if they don't do a good job with marketing, I've lost nothing.
So what you're saying is that because of the traction you had and the specific publisher you worked with, you had a lot of negotiating power, and the contract itself was very favorable to you.
Yes. Yeah, and that's something that Tim speaks about. Like, he actually did an interview with Stealth17, I think is a Dutch YouTuber, focuses a lot on strategy games. And he said that a lot of publishers will say, well, we like to keep our contracts the same because that's fair. But that's actually not fair, because what if a game is doing incredibly well without a publisher? What if a game's not? It's not fair to treat those games the same from a marketing and publishing perspective. Like, you've got to recognize what someone or what a team has been able to achieve.
Some games are just stickier than others too. Like, they just
exactly.
Better.
Yeah, and but that doesn't mean that the game that's not performing as well doesn't need to exist.
Right.
But you might not be able to take the same risk with the game that you could with the game that's performing well. And also, something else that Tim said to me as well, which I've actually seen him do countless times with many developers that have approached him, is he said to me, look, even if you don't sign with me, I want to help you. So I can always ask him for, like, marketing, the marketing advice, stuff like that. So all of these sort of things, I could tell that this guy cares about games. He cares about good games. He cares about supporting developers. The terms of the contract were so favorable, which I wouldn't have known if I didn't reject all of the 30 others. So that's also the thing, that if you don't need to sign with a publisher, then don't sign with the first one. Which can take a bit of guts to do, because like, well, what if I don't get a second one?
So in terms of the publisher helping you with marketing,
Mm.
I'm guessing that frees up your time to work on your game. A lot of
Yes.
indie developers we talk to, they're like, wow, I spend so much time marketing, managing my Discord, creating new videos, doing vlogs, and there's stuff in the marketing bucket that just takes a lot of your time. What are the things that you were doing pre-publisher that you're now not doing post-publisher that's allowed you to work more on the game development?
Sure. So before, I was doing everything, you know, reaching out to like content creators, having those discussions, trying to reach out to mainstream media, things like that. So Hooded Horse, the publisher, take care of all of that. Now, if I wanted to, I could send my videos off to like them, and they would pay someone to create my trailers, but I haven't given over that. It's like, that's something that I'm very passionate about. My trailers, I enjoy doing them. I want them to look a certain way. And yeah, so I haven't given over that. In my Discord server, so it's grown a lot. There's just shy of 8,000, I think, members at the moment. Let me just check. Yeah, just shy of 8,000. So I've got a moderation team. I've got a community manager there. I've got 5 additional moderators. We'll probably have to expand that soon. So they basically run the show, and that's all volunteer, right? I've got a couple of lead testers, and they're volunteer, of course. And so surrounding yourself with people you trust in all different areas is really good and really key. But I will say, having a publisher as well, like, they've got connections, right? So thanks to just Hooded Horse, my trailers are on right now on IGN, and they perform quite well there. Thanks to having a publisher, Falling Frontier went to E3 last year. I mean, I didn't go because it was digital, but Falling Frontier won most anticipated indie game of 2021.
Wow.
And is that, I'm sure you're just about to mention this, but I'm wondering, for those listening, if you get an award like that, does it give you a step up in terms of eyeballs, interest? Are there now a whole bunch more people knocking on the door? Is it worth it to strive for those sorts of awards? Does it have a meaningful impact on wish lists, on exposure, etc.? Like, how worthy is it to pursue that?
Yeah, it's like a big yes, but a firm no, if that makes sense. And
it doesn't.
I'll explain that. So it's an award that means everything. It's an award that means nothing. So it depends on who you speak to. I mean, from a wish list perspective, so that award, that exposure, I mean, you're looking at like 20,000 wish lists or something like that in a single day kind of thing, right? For an indie developer, that's huge. That's like almost twice what I was hoping to get to start with when I first started this thing. But what it gives you is it gives you an element of legitimacy, which, as someone starting out, that's something that you don't have. No matter what you produce, you haven't released something. And I think most developers, or developers that care about what they're doing, have a certain element of imposter syndrome. You know, you always feel like you're wearing someone else's shoes. It's like, I don't belong here. But you can either let that pull you back, or you can let that drive you to make your stuff better. And so that kind of exposure, it gives you legitimacy, which can in turn help that internal cog in your head say, well, you know what, other people, you know, critics are actually saying this looks good. You know, they want to play this. Whether or not it opens doors, not necessarily, because those awards are usually voted on by the editors of those different magazines. but the editor doesn't dictate what their writers are going to write.
Yep.
You know, so that doesn't mean that it opens doors per se, unless your game is something that particular writer loves. So it's an amazing thing. It is something worth striving for. I mean, even just from a personal thing, it's like to win an award at E3, right? And I know people say, oh, it's just E3, it doesn't matter. But, you know, developers don't have a lot of avenues to be publicly recognized, you know, like formally recognized by some sort of institution. E3 is one of those things where we can go, hey, you know, someone has formally given me something to say, you know what, you deserve this. Yeah, so, and yeah, so it's worth it. It is definitely worth it.
You've made a game that clearly is spectacular and deep and big, and as a solo developer, it's taken a lot of your time. And before that, years and years of thinking about it and prototyping and learning and fiddling around with the direction you're going to go in. Looking back on it, do you feel that you could have got to this point more quickly? And the reason I ask that is largely so people listening at the moment are like, dang, this guy spent a decade on this thing. I don't know if I want the journey to be quite that long for me. Can it be done quicker? Is it just that you chose, you know, an RTS, which is a big sort of genre to go for? Is it that you had distractions? Is it that, no, you were smashing on this full on? Could you have partnered up with someone? Just, I guess we're looking for a little bit of
alternative.
Or just hope, maybe is the word. Hope that it's not going to take, you know, a huge amount of time. Sure. Not saying it shouldn't. And sort of on the back of my question is a little bit of, was it good that you've been working on this in more of a polished state for so long? Because it gives people the opportunity to find it and to think about it and to talk about it. And, you know, if you make a thing and then you quickly put it out there and it's launched, then, you know, maybe you don't get that anticipation of it'll launch one day. So a few things joined together there in terms of could you have done it quicker? And is it necessarily a bad thing that it's in development for a long time, because maybe the longer you wait, the more impact it will have when you launch, and therefore it's going to do better than if you just sort of, you know, smash it out more quickly?
Sure. So I'm sure there could have been ways to do it faster. And perhaps that's, you know, if I had a greater interest in coding younger, then maybe that would have jump-started this, that part of the process, because that was the one skill I really had to upskill. I had formal training and like interest in, I was doing 3D animations when I was 15, right? That's my own sort of learning. So if I had that same interest then as a hobby, then yeah, sure. Professionally, teaming up with people, yeah, fantastic, great. But there are challenges around that too, especially when it starts as a passion project, because if people don't have the same passion as you, if it's your idea, if you are the driving force and other people don't have that same drive, well, then you're the one left dragging people.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that in a...
You're better off having contractors at that point, where it's more of a transaction as opposed to a partner where you're like, wow, let's get excited about my game. And they're like, well, maybe instead of spaceships, we should have flying dogs.
Yeah. So, yeah, unless you all come up with the idea together and you're all as passionate about it as each other. And like even going into the space of having contracts between each other about what you are prepared to commit to the game, regardless of, well, I mean, with exceptions of like if you've got kids or there's a tragedy or something like that, but to actually get commitment from people, and not just verbal, but because people's lives change and people's priorities change. And if you're making games with people and there's no financials involved, well then, commitment can wane. So then the cost of someone not committing could be, well, like we go through a discussion process, like how much can like you actually commit, but well then perhaps you disagree, well, you're off the project and you walk away. And that was actually something that I went through, and it wasn't a negative experience. I started creating Falling Frontier like the first time with a bunch of other people that had development skills. I didn't have the programming skills, but I had the art skills. But people were really busy, and they've got families and lives and things come up and priorities change and work can get in the way. But I was the one with the driving force, and I'm not trying to criticize anyone, but everyone agreed that I was the one doing the work consistently. I was the one spending 6 hours every night working on this thing.
Yeah.
But with pretty models, it just nothing happens, right? So they all said, look, go for it. I mean, I basically sat everyone down and said, look, let's have a serious talk. And we were all friends, and we're still all great friends. And I said, look, I really want to make this happen. So I think I'm going to go it alone. And basically any code that was done by those people was basically deleted, started from scratch, learned what I had to learn. And so, yeah, there are ways to do it faster, but it can be more complicated. It can be more simple. It just depends on the people. But as you do say, Rick, going down the monetary contract route can be the best way to do it, because
just cleaner, isn't it?
It's cleaner. There's someone is motivated because they're being paid, and from a licensing perspective, well, you've got the rights to use it, but then you have to be careful. Like, you have to make sure you get exclusive rights, which costs more than just someone doing something that they can then sell to someone else.
Right.
So that's the important thing too.
There's a lot of people that end up in verbal agreements where it's like, oh, we're going to work on a game together, but then it goes south, and like the game might have some success, and it's like, what do you own? What do I own? What part of that game is mine? Yeah, it's very messy.
And don't offer percentages of profits to people. Like, don't do that. This is, like to try to get, just someone to do your sound. Don't say, well, you can have 3% of profits, blah, blah, blah. No. I don't think that's a good way to go for people who are basically working on a game. Because even if you formalize it, that's going to potentially create major issues down the line. Like, if the game doesn't do well, and this composer potentially has spent a lot of time, which they could have made a lot of money, selling their services elsewhere. Well, and you could argue, well, that's a risk that they took, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, you want to get to the end of a game process that everyone was treated fairly. Everyone felt as though they were treated fairly, and everyone's done well. Commercially based upon what they've invested.
Yeah, I don't think there's any scenario where that works out, right? The game underperforms, they're underpaid. The game overperforms, they're super overpaid. Maybe they're happy, but still, from an accounting perspective, that gets complicated. Or worst case scenario, it staggers along, kind of sort of doing okay, but not quite making enough money to make anybody really happy. And then you've got this weird conversation a year down the line where you want to make a DLC, but they don't want to. So you need a different sound guy, but you had this whole... Yeah, it's...
Plus also IP ownership.
Yeah.
Like you said, just who owns what? The game world, just who owns that. And it's also... I know a lot of people might just get into solo development as like a as a person entity, and they've got the relationship with Steam, whatever. And that could be fine. But from an accounting perspective, that can create problems down the line. Like if your game is incredibly popular, like huge, and you want to sell the game or you want to sell the IP, well, the IP is linked to you as a person. Like legally, it's a part of you. It's not this separate entity. And so because then the game has wealth, the IP has wealth, it can be hard to differentiate commercially how to package that up. Just whereas in the case of Falling Frontier, I own, the company that is Stutter Fox Studios, but that's a separate entity. The Falling Frontier IP is a separate entity that I have signed over to Stutter Fox Studios. I am a director at Stutter Fox Studios. I just don't have a salary. So that basically means that if someone comes along and they want to buy the studio, then I can easily sell that because it is unlinked to me as a person. If someone wants to license the Falling Frontier universe to make a book or a movie or even another game or something, I can easily license that because it's not linked to me as a person. It's owned as a separate entity by the company. Also, if just from a legal perspective, like say your game has like lots of flashy lights and someone gets hurt, if companies have liability, individuals, it's all like your house, your car, everything you own can be taken away from you. That's a worst case scenario, but it's important to think about these things before you make a profit, because setting up the right business structure protects you and your family or your future family long term. And it does cost you more upfront because you have to go through the legal process of setting up a company, and well, do you then have a trustee for that company, stuff like that, and then there's the whole IP assignment, which is not cheap to do as well. Like these are legal documents that have to be 100% correct, and so it's a cost investment, but it might end up that you don't need it, but like you don't have to do that right at the start, but it's important to do that before it makes money.
Yeah.
And it's also important to at least have a company structure set up before signing with the publisher.
For sure.
Because if you're signing as an individual, a publisher might not even want to do that. Some might, but I don't think most would want to do that.
Yeah. Real quick, if anybody in the chat has any questions at all, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'd be happy.
I was just about to say that, Tim.
On the same wavelength. I cut you off to say it. But so while we're waiting for questions, I'm curious.
Sure.
You've had a lot of success with this so far, and I do say that because like most developers never get over 1,000 wish lists. Like most games never do well. By default, most games are just kind of lost to the ether. It's just like any entertainment medium with this much volume. But you also seem like you got a really good head on your shoulders. You got the legal stuff handled. You got publisher. Like what sets you down that whole business path? Because there's the development path where you make the cool thing, but what kind of sets you or got you started down the business side of things? Because some people don't ever like to approach that at all. Stay away from that stuff completely.
Well, for me, it's about a legacy. And I know that might be a bit of a corny word, but what's the legacy I want out of all this? Do I want something that can, and that's just not from what game do I want to make and what mark do I want to make on the gaming landscape? I mean, that's certainly a part of it, but what do I want my family to benefit? Because what do I want people around me to benefit? Because lots of people have made sacrifices. Lots of people. My wife has sacrificed time with me over a number of years. That's time she can't get back. You know, there's like lots of people have trusted me that I will steward this well. So I want to honor that, and and so like a driving force for that is to ensure I've got the right business structure, to ensure it is set up correctly, to ensure that not only am I protected, but are they protected? And if something happens to me, they are protected for the rest of their lives. I mean, that's all anybody really wants, right? To be able to leave a mark, a good mark, and to protect those that they care about. And also, I wanted to have a studio that will hopefully be remembered, and it'll take decades to get there, I'm sure, but hopefully will be remembered as a studio that always cared about the games that they put out. You know, like the quality came first. It was never about the profits, because it's possible to be profitable and to be ethical. Those two things can exist. You know, money's not a bad thing, but the love of money can be bad. Well, it is bad because it drives you to make more instead of just driving you to make good things, which then leads to the profits. Yeah. Oh gosh, don't get me started.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of predatory behaviors in the games industry, and that's not going away. That's only going to get worse. And people are turning towards indie developers to a degree. I mean, lots of people aren't, but lots of people are, because they see indie developers as the new frontier of creating stuff that is good and fun. It might not look as good as like a AAA game, but the quality is there, and the passion is there, and the drive is there, and it's player focused, it's community focused. It's not a dump and run. It's not a rug pull. It's, you know, and I want to be a part of that, and I want to be a part of doing that well.
Todd, on that, if
Sure.
this game goes well, and you've worked really hard, this is the caveat, or this is the clarification. I think it's good for people to see that they might see you like, wow, lots of wish lists, and your game's getting publicity, and you're doing well. Isn't he lucky, or oh, he has something I don't have? But I think if we look at all the years you've invested, years where you haven't been paid, so the success you're going to have has to pay for all of those years where you weren't paying yourself. So I think that's good context. But if the game has some success and you get some momentum from from that side of things, what would be your thought process? Are you going to stay solo indie developer forever and make another game or 2 or 10? Are you going to say, right, now it's time to grow my studio and get get a couple of programmers and a couple of artists? And obviously it depends on the scale of success. Will you scale up your business in proportion to the success? So, the bigger the game becomes, the more people, and is your goal to have a studio of 100 people making 7 games at once, or maybe it's 1,000 people making 7 games at once? What for you is the ideal? Do you just want to stay solo forever?
I don't want to stay solo forever. I would definitely love to have staff. I would love to. I mean, like, I am not the master of any discipline. I will happily admit that. I'm a jack of all trades. What I think I'm good at is bringing disciplines together that usually people are usually good at one thing or maybe a couple of things. And I like to think over the years I've learned how to bring them together in at least a semi-competent way.
Very good at aesthetics too. Like, the game looks amazing.
Thank you.
I on all the stuff, I called you the director of Stutter Fox Studios. I know that's your technical title, but that's because I thought you had like a team of 10 people in the art department, because it looks amazing.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm trying to push the idea of what can a small team or what can a single person do, because they can do a lot if they work hard and they've got a good idea and all of that stuff. But back to your question, Rick. I mean, I would, I'm an advocate for finding people better than you. surrounding yourself with people smarter
Better than
you.
me. That's not hard to do.
Well, not
You
you
mean
specifically.
you conceptually, or you as in you, Rick, finding people better than Rick? It's like
More
that one course you
conceptually,
took from
but
us was like, I need some better than these schmucks. So I get it, man. That's a pretty low bar to set, but I think it's a
well,
good goal. Better
yeah,
than Rick.
yeah, but the concept of that
Surround yourself with
people
people that
smarter than
make,
you
yeah,
in
I agree.
everything,
Absolutely.
everything.
That's why Tim's here. Whew.
Better, better programmers, better artists, better sound designers, better storytellers, better writers, better everything. Like,
Yeah.
know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, and try to be better at what you're not good
That
at.
can feed into the imposter syndrome
Yes.
problem, though. If you don't feel
Completely.
secure with yourself, you're like, oh, I've got this person who's so much better than me. Oh, what do I do? But if you're the person who's the hub or the visionary or the bringer together, then I don't think you need to feel that imposter
No.
syndrome. You just embrace the fact that, wow,
No.
that person's better than I am
Yep.
at this thing.
Yep, and being able to learn from people. If you can learn from people, the moment you stop learning, or the moment you stop thinking that you need to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a game developer out there that doesn't use Google to find some obscure answer to something. We all do it. I'm going to do it today, I'm sure. Well, maybe not, but is it just? But you frequently go back to
what's a variable?
resources. Yeah, what's a variable?
Okay, got it.
What's an enum? I don't know. So don't be afraid of, like, you don't have to pretend like you know everything, because no developer does. And especially if you were trying to do everything, you will need external resources. You will. But that grows you, that helps expand you. It's uncomfortable, but, like, learning is like a muscle. When you work out, it breaks down, but it grows, it gets better, it gets bigger. So yeah, I would want to surround myself with people who are better at everything than me, and then I could work with them with what I would love to create next. But it's also important for people to have a buy-in, right? Like, you just can't tell people what to do. It's better for people to want to do it because they're passionate about it, and that goes beyond just paying them. But fiscally, like, actually, just taking a step back. So your question, Rick, was about, would I scale that based upon the profits? The answer to that is no. I would scale it to based upon what I want to create.
Right.
Ultimately, I've got a publisher that if I needed to ask for a large sum of development funds, I could do it in a heartbeat. I could call him right after this and just say, I need this, and he'd be like, okay, because he trusts that I know why I'm asking, and he has offered me large sums previously to do A, B, and C, and I turned it down because, like, no, it's fine, I don't need it. So working within your means is really good skill to have, but it's also expensive to hire people. So, like, let's work on average. So Australian costs, because Australia has a higher cost of living than a lot of other places. And if I'm at the point where I am hiring staff like that, I would probably want to have a physical office. I mean, I know in a post-COVID environment, that's less important, but from a studio valuation perspective, having a physical place is important. I mean, again, that goes to the whole validity thing, but that validity is like less about the game being developed, but more about, if, like, you wanted to sell, well, selling without a physical location can actually devalue your company. So all of these things, and then the company value potentially allows you to sell shares if you wanted to sell shares. But if you don't have a physical office to selling shares, so that's a whole separate conversation. But like, average cost, right? So say you wanted to hire 5 people, and by that point you probably need to have HR as well, so that's 6 people, but they might not need to be full-time. And then you've got 5-6 people let's say on average $100,000, 90 to $100,000. So every year you are looking at $600,000, plus holiday pay and all that stuff, and plus superannuation, because that's a thing here. And then there's usually company benefits, so insurances and all that. So there's all of these extra costs. And then if you want to make a game, so say on average a game takes 3 to 5, or like 5 years to make, or 3 to 5 years to make, you're easily at getting close to the $3 million mark just in paying people. And then you've got all of the costs of the hardware, and then there's the studio, the actual physical place that you're paying for, and the outfit. And
so what I'm hearing is just stay solo with a couple of contractors, and
Well,
I've been down that
you
path
then need
as
a
well.
buffer. Like you got to have like a buffer to, so then you kind of want to have almost double that amount. So the cost to actually even have 5 people working for you on a game that hasn't been released yet is huge, which
it's pretty big. Yeah,
it's very big. There's lots of costs involved. But look, I mean, I don't know what my next game would be, but it would probably be something in the Fallen Frontier universe.
I think that's clever. That's something that I preach as well to anyone who's looking to be a professional game developer, is stay in a genre if you can.
Yeah.
And it's our creativity and our entrepreneurship and our striving for new things that I think can often derail us from being successful, because you start off learning all of the stuff you need to know about an RTS, and you're like, oh, I'm kind of done with RTS. Now I'm going to go off and make a racing game, and then you have to start from scratch for the racing game physics and all that kind of jazz. But yeah, I would say if you can stay in the same universe, means art potentially and story potentially and genre of game possibly. I think that's the thing to do.
Yeah, it certainly sets the tone for what you want to create. I mean, and look, the same genre of game generally helps because you've got a loyal fan base.
That's
so,
and you've got the connections with the media as well. People who their YouTube channel is all about sci-fi type games. You don't want to then go and make a fairy princess game, although you might. That might be something you've been hankering to do for a while. Todd's Fairy Princess Adventure. I mean,
but look, I've got ideas of RPGs and action games set in the Falling Frontier universe, like big games. I don't limit myself. That's part of my problem. I want to do these big, massive things, but these are games that I definitely know I couldn't do by myself.
Yeah.
But I would love to do. After Falling Frontier, well, then you've got potential expansions. And which I separate to like DLC. I think DLC should be free, because it's a small piece of content. But expansions, that take a lot to make, should be chargeable. And so there's that side of it.
I'm really a couple of friends of mine that started Red Hook Studios and made Darkest Dungeon. Their strategy has been continue making Darkest Dungeon, port it to every every console possible, and then make Darkest Dungeon 2.
Yep.
And I think their involvement doesn't need to be the same as it was at the start. But from a business point of view, that's the way to do it. That's have success, build on that success. So I think anyone watching now thinking, well, I've made a couple of games and I'm in this area. I'm getting a little bit bored with this particular thing. You got to ask yourself, are you a hobbyist or are you a professional when it comes to game development? Both are awesome and both are valid. But as soon as you say, this is my business, you need to start making business decisions. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to just tell the creativity, okay, you get 2 hours on a Saturday when we're not working on our day job to make some funky prototypes and to do some game jams. But you just don't get to steer the business in a particular direction based upon what would be neat. And I think that's a hard decision to make. It's a real mindset. You say, okay, now I'm doing this as a business. And it can squash some of the creativity.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, as well, you can make business decisions that will go, well, you know what? The cost of time to do that feature doesn't, as much as people would love it, it doesn't make sense from a business perspective. So let's not put that in. And you have to do that. And there's like Falling Frontier, there were features that I wanted to have in the game that honestly have never been done before, which I won't repeat them because I might do it with the second one. But it would have added an extra element of amazing strategy to it. But it just would have added at least an extra year of work.
Movable units, that would be just like
mind blowing.
You should give that, yeah.
Look,
that's just one of many tips we've got, Todd, for how to improve your game.
Combat stuff.
Don't even get it. Combat. You could have they shoot each other. Woo, that would be
maybe.
So cool.
Something I did want to say is that something that is getting more attention in the gaming sphere now, which is great, but it's something that I would love to do more once the game is out and potentially after the game hits version 1.0, because the game will go live in early access, but it'll be like vertical slices instead of horizontal slices. So completed chunks of the campaign, and then version 1.0, the skirmish mode comes out, which is your typical conquest type mode. And there'll be a scenario creator that gets released as well, that people can actually make their own campaigns and then upload them to Steam Workshop and stuff like that. But something that I've looked into is accessibility options. So color blindness, things like that. There's a large portion of gamers that have some degree of color blindness. For some it can be severe, for others not. And a UI heavy game, that can impact the ability for someone to play. And I've done research into that. To change thousands of UI elements is a lot of work, because you've got to change the image itself. You can do that part of post-processing, but the UI is drawn after post-processing, unless you've got an in-world camera, but you don't want to change your UI with post-processing unless you want to, but for general UI you don't. So that's a bespoke system to do that, and I've done research into it. I know how I'm going to do it, but it's something that I would want to add as version 1.0, well, after version 1.0, or maybe part of it, just depends. But that's a lot of work. That's probably a couple of months worth of work that I feel is important to give to a percentage of players who might be able to enjoy the game.
Right.
And I've like looked into other things like, what about people that have hearing impairments? How can I help them? So I want to do things. I would love to do things that would help people with hearing impairments to be able to play, and also those that can't actually use a mouse and keyboard, that they can only do verbal commands. So that's something that I've thought about too, because strategy games rarely ever cater to those sort of buckets of people. And I don't mean bucket in a bad way, but I just mean a group of people who have a disability that just can't play a genre that they might love. So I feel that's also, and so sorry just to hijack the conversation there, but I feel as though that's also something worth discussing and worth getting people to think about, because when we create games, we see it through our own eyes and our own way we are able to play it. And if we're able-bodied completely, well, that's a blessing. But we usually don't think about that process of, but what about people that aren't like me? And epilepsy and things like that. Like, you have to be careful about all of these sorts of things. That one's a bit. That's kind. I just think it's like gamers come in all shapes and forms, and
I think that's great. You've clearly got a customer centric frame of mind, and to go above and beyond, I think is really admirable. And the more we talk about that kind of accessibility and inclusivity, the better. So I appreciate that's something you're looking at. That's really cool.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's just like, as game developers, don't we just want as many people to play our games as possible?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of the dream of making a game to bring joy to someone's life. So at the end of the day, if we get so centered, like egocentric on, I want to make a thing because it's cool and it's a good challenge, and I solved a problem for me, then that's okay. I think that's feeding a little bit of your own soul. But at the end of the day, we're making a product, a piece of entertainment, a piece of challenge for other people. So it's really important to consider who are those other people.
Yeah, 100%.
So we're at the wrap it up stage of our conversation. 15 minutes ago.
Sorry about that.
No, that's good. No, it's awesome hearing you talk about what you're up to, and to catch you right before the chaos of properly launching and getting into early access. So I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. What would be the piece of advice you would give someone who's out there? They've taken a course or two or three, they've worked on a game jam or two, they've got a couple of big ideas, they can see you having that, that long journey to success. What would you say to them, and or yourself 10 years ago, in terms of what's really important to focus on? What's your piece of advice for those folks?
Sure. So, I mean, it's a challenging one, because I want to give advice that is specific to game development, like do this one thing, but games are made by people, and people are fallible, and I would encourage people to just start doing. Like, if you don't know it, you will know it eventually. I started creating things in Falling Frontier 3 years ago that I look back, that I have just looked back at and go, well, I know of 5 better ways to do that, and then you go back and you change it, and that costs you time to redo stuff, especially core systems. But it's important to start.
Yeah.
Like don't ever not start because you don't think you aren't smart enough, or you don't know the skills, you don't know the tools. Learn them, fail, try again, rinse, repeat. Never have a 0% day, even if it's just to write a single letter of a story for your game. Just do it. Just keep doing it every day as best you can. And for big projects, there is project fatigue. I've gone through ups and downs where some days I just don't want to work on the games. Like, I'm dealing with this problem and it's hard, but you push through because the curve, you'll be up there again.
Yep.
And so just keep doing, force yourself. It's not always going to be fun. It's not always going to be this great big thing that is the best thing. Like every day you love going to work, because you won't, because when you do something that you love as a hobby professionally, you are going to have challenging days, but they're far less than the days that you go, this is awesome.
Gotcha.
So just push through as best you can.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we really appreciate you coming on. And also, for us, we're so excited to meet anyone who has gone through our courses at some stage and taken some of that knowledge or inspiration or a starting point or momentum, whatever it might be, and then time after that, turning that into it's a career, it's a viable option for you. You're doing something that you've created something from nothing just based upon your own energy. So thanks for sharing that story with us. And
thank you.
Yeah, and for folks watching, it's you can do it. You just need to persist, like Todd's saying. Just start it, just do it, just go for it, and get it going. Yep. So please do keep us in the loop on how the launch is going. Check back with us, let us know what's going on. Provide all those like super discounts for our community to get the game. I think Tim put the link in the chat again to go wishlist it. So if you're watching and you're interested, I've wishlisted it. Go check out Falling Frontier. I keep wanting to say Final Frontier. I must have played that game a bunch. It's in my head. It's words are jumbled up in my head.
It takes time. A lot of people do that, but then they get, no, it's Falling Frontier. Yeah.
Falling Frontier, yeah. Falling or Fallen Frontier?
Falling. Falling Frontier was actually a cancelled game.
Okay.
So, so that's one last thing. What your game is actually named, make sure you research that extensively. Because it's really important.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
cool. Well, thanks for joining us today, Todd.
Thanks,
really
guys.
appreciate your time.
Not a problem.
Lovely chatting with you. And hoorah that the Aussies are out there in the world making a bit of a dent on these things.
Hopefully.
So Australia
crossed.
won, Tim Ruswick's Americans not. Well, I don't know. Let's not do that.
Yeah, I won't get into that conversation.
Not yet.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Todd, for coming along. Thank you, Rick, for
No problem.
making it entertaining.
Thanks, gents. Thanks, chat.
Have a good night, everybody.